All right, we are going to start in 30 seconds to 1 minute. All right, so we are going to start in exactly one more minute. I'm going to mic check this particular content real quick. This particular content. All right, so we got the mic check ready on that one. What an absolutely shocking turn of events as Sean Strickland spoils the party. So, why do I say that he spoiled the party? Well, first and foremost, if you remember in the review show that I did with this particular content, where I mentioned a history of UFC 293 and how the matchups came about or lack of, in this case, uh, Dricus Duplessis was supposed to fight Israel Adesanya. And in comes Sean Strickland, a guy who constantly spars, a guy who constantly only goes into combat to stay in shape, which means that he does very limited when it comes to, let's say, conditioning, maybe even other aspects of the martial arts. Although one can argue that he does wrestle when he does fighting or does sparring in that particular matter. And you also got to take into consideration the two contrasting generations between Israel Adesanya and Sean Strickland. Obviously, Israel Adesanya, you could say, is an late 80s baby, whereas with Sean Strickland, he's a 90s baby. And in which you got to understand the way that Sean Strickland came into the martial arts game was doing mixed martial arts as a whole, not as a singular art form, which is the reason why he was able to do exactly what he did tonight. And with Israel Adesanya, well, in this case, this is a guy who was coming out of the 80s, per se, right? He was a guy who was, in this particular matter, a singular focus martial artist, where he did a lot of kickboxing from Muay Thai, maybe even delved into karate as a kid. But of course, you could just say that Israel Adesanya is a pure Muay Thai guy that just happened to implement all these dance moves and rhythm into his fighting style, in which what you see today as the modern style bender. And in comes Sean Strickland being able to counter that with exactly what? Pressure, simple shots of just using the jabs. And then on top of that, the perfection of the Philly shell in which Sean Strickland was executing this particular fight. Now, you could probably think that there's a lot of world championship level boxers out there that were looking at this fight thinking to themselves, I could win a title fight in the UFC just based on using some jabs and some Philly shells alone. Think about all the different names that are boxers at the highest level possibly watching tonight and thinking to themselves, wow, this guy has good boxing. And how about all the other boxing heads out there that do boxing YouTube that, once again, from what I heard, there was no boxing fights really going on this Saturday night. So that means that the UFC was the only game in town. And then lo and behold, here comes Sean Strickland upsetting the world, in which this fight was supposed to be set up in order to have Israel Adesanya face Dricus Duplessis because of the racial implications and the entertainment value that fight could bring. But Sean Strickland shows one thing that we understand about combat sports as we know it. It doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care about what is exciting to fans. It only cares about what works and what is the current moment best practice in martial arts in this current time and era within a particular weight class that we compete in, which is 185 pounds in this particular case. And by the way, how about the fact that Sean Strickland had a loss against Kamaru Usman in the 170 division? So this guy has been around. He's been in the trenches. He's had these fights. He knows how to feel like this is just another day in the office. And that's something that I think is very important to understand. Let me tell you, when I saw Sean Strickland tonight walk into the cage, I said to myself, he looks very scared. And then when he walked into the arena, the shot that ESPN shows you as they walk into the arena within the main card or so, you think he looks scared. He has that same look that McGregor had when he walked in to the Las Vegas to fight Khabib. And you think to yourself, man, you know what? Connor now has to answer all this trash talk. And well, the same thing with freaking Sean Strickland. He had to answer for all this talking. Ronda Rousey, which we're going to get to because you see that I have the poster for the old fight of UFC 193, and now this is UFC 293, right? The comparison between these two. Going into this fight, a lot of people were saying something to the effect of this is going to have the 93 effect, meaning that in UFC 193, you saw Ronda get head kicked by Holly Holmes. What was significant about that? Here's something I remember during that time frame. A lot of people were piling on Ronda Rousey because of the fact that she was a trash talker. She was brass. She felt like she was better than you. She had that attitude of the holier than art thou mentality. And on top of that, she was a global star. So it was very hard to relate to in all those terms that I just mentioned. So it's easy to have hated her. And then on top of that, even easier to pile on the fact that she had lost in such humiliating fashion in front of the world. And here's another significant comparisons and parallels to these two dimensions of UFC 293 and UFC 193, which is what? Well, it is exactly that boxing and simple shots win fights. Israel Adesanya is a very sophisticated striker. Ronda Rousey, just like the counterpart of Izzy being a world famous, iconic champion, is a person that relies a lot on explosivity in terms of her judo, in the way that Israel Adesanya relies his explosivity in terms of his striking and in terms of his counter shots. But in this case, what you got was a situation where Sean Strickland was able to maneuver himself forward and show that he was a stronger fighter in the exchanges, and showing that Izzy was more of a scared guy and a scared competitor to engage. And with that, created an advantage that made him the clear winner of this fight with at least 3-1 rounds towards Sean Strickland going into the 5th round. And that's very, like, that's very kind to say. I can't even really remember a single round that Israel Adesanya had won. In all honesty, I feel like he lost all 5 rounds. Round 1, 2, and 3. And on top of that, this is another thing you got to understand from a technical level. Wait, hold on. Let's Israel Adesanya is now on the mic. Hold on. Let's react to this.
My team, and they're waiting for me, so I'm going to do that. But I will leave you in the capable hands of a man who's much smarter than me. I'll admit this on worldwide national media. I'll leave you with Eugene Behrman. He'll handle this for the first time. I want to go chill, have some breakfast, build my family, and yeah, till next time.
And that was Israel Adesanya right now. This is live, by the way, while I'm also reacting to the Joe Rogan Fight Companion. And now he's bringing on Eugene Berman. We're wondering why this is.
He wants to be protected, and it's our job to protect him. So this is what he wants. This is what he gets. This is his time right now. He's in a time of need right now. So if I have to sit up here in front of you guys, then I have to sit up here in front of you guys for him. Do you have any questions? Yeah.
Help him out, people. Read the room.
Most people would agree that was not the Israel Adesanya we're used to seeing him that tonight. He looks slow, he looks off, kind of fatigued early. Can you tell us?
Okay, so you obviously can watch the full press conference of that. But what is Eugene Berman saying right now? Hold on. I think what is it?
And I never once thought that Sean wasn't capable of beating Israel. But I thought if Israel performed to the fullest of his capabilities, it would be a very hard fight for Sean. There was an alternate kind of universe where if Israel performs as poorest or poorly, where Sean could win. And I'm sitting in that universe right now. So he had an off night. Training camp was great. I'm not going to make any excuses in regard to that. Leading up to the fight week was great. Sparring partners, everything, all the technical things to do with the camp, they were all perfect. So there's no excuses there. He came in, he had an off night. He couldn't see the same things that we were seeing. We couldn't make a good connection in the corner. It was just a frustrating night, yeah. But why was it a frustrating night? Well, it was a frustrating night because of the opponent. Don't take nothing away from the opponent.
Dana has already been in here and said we'd like to see a rematch. Do you drastically change things ahead of that, or do you think, well, we think we got it right, Israel just had an off night, hope that doesn't happen again?
In my career, I've been involved in a few rematch camps, and they're very, very difficult. Why are they so difficult? Why is a rematch camp so difficult? You're trying to find other stones to leave unturned, but you already haven't left the stone unturned. So it's almost an impossible task. You're trying to find another level above the level that you've already achieved, but it's not achievable. So it's very, very difficult when you go into these rematch camps. And at this level, I've done a few. The Pereira one just recently. It's very, very difficult to do a rematch camp, but like I said, I don't think we have to change too much, but we will find something because we have the benefit of time. So we will get down to our usual business as a coaching team, and we'll find something to add to this camp, and we'll win the rematch.
Would you like that rematch as soon as possible, or do you think maybe some time off could be beneficial for Israel?
Well, I asked Mick if we could have the rematch next weekend. Whether he grants it, I'm not sure, but I'm just very confident that we can change the outcome of this fight with very minor adjustments. What I'm saying is, we couldn't get Israel to enact our plan. There wasn't much cohesion in the corner. You have nights like this, and I think we could do the rematch tomorrow, and I think we can have a good night.
That's interesting. Well, he's got to say that because he believes in his athlete.
Of course.
You know,
Yeah, so pretty much that was Eugene Berman speaking on behalf of none other than Israel Adesanya, and the reason being was because Israel Adesanya just felt like he needed a break. He felt like he needed to lay some pressure off of his shoulders of being the champion and go have breakfast with his family and just be a normal person. But at the same time, he wanted to also give the mic to Eugene Berman. And the way that Eugene Berman interprets it, he says it in a different alternative universe. I pictured that there is a winner of Sean Strickland, and that being in this reality right now. And I thought that was interesting because you know what? You have to understand anything can absolutely happen in a fight. And tonight is just one of those nights where I'm literally not any loss for words in how to describe it. Well, this is literally what we love the sport of mixed martial arts to be. Because guess what? Even with the Spence and Errol Spence and Crawford fight, you almost felt like Crawford was going to be the winner of that fight just based on the fact that he didn't have those accidents. He doesn't have a lifestyle issue in terms of how he lives as a boxer and as a full-time athlete. So you kind of knew or thought in your mind that, hey, you know what? We kind of know what happens here. Now, tonight, you really didn't know what was going to happen because guess what? You look at Sean Strickland and you think to yourself, you know, this guy, he is this hillbilly who comes from this background or this and that. And in reality, that type of background, in all honesty, is really what helps you win. You got to be a little bit crazy to win in combat sports. And a lot of people don't understand that. There are guys that can win fights that are athletes, the guys that can win fights based on the fact that they have a certain advantage over another guy based on a certain attribute that they can outmatch the other guy with or make them play their game. So therefore, they're going to become successful at. This is Israel Adesanya that I'm talking about. He's never really been challenged in terms of wrestling, in terms of being submitted in any kind of capacity. None of that. He never had to experience any of that. He was always able to fight his game. The problem with that, though, with Israel Adesanya being able to, let's say, play his game, was that he expected that he was always going to be the best at it until tonight. Now, was there a world where I can envision Sean Strickland of winning with, I guess, with a lucky shot? Yes. Is there a world where I can see Sean Strickland winning with wrestling, being able to out-grapple Israel Adesanya? Yes. The problem is that particular world is not, it wasn't the reality tonight. He beat Israel Adesanya with the most simple shots that you are taught in the basics of kickboxing, and he was able to implement it. Why was he able to do that? I think just based on strength alone. And by the way, Israel Adesanya, I would say, is supposed to be the stronger guy based on the fact that he does all the conditioning drills, all the weight training that is specific to MMA. In terms of Sean Strickland, he doesn't really do any of that. In comparison to Israel Adesanya, there's none of that. What he does is he goes to the gym, he puts on his mouth guard, shin guards, a few MMA gloves, maybe a few boxing gloves at times, and he goes and just spars away. There's a professional boxer that wants to talk smack and says that he can beat everybody in that particular gym. He goes in there and boxes the guy. There's a kickboxer that wants to talk smack. He goes in there and kickboxes them in a sparring match. If there's a jiu-jitsu guy, if you guys remember that big Mexican guy who died recently, he had a little thing going on with Sean Strickland where he tried to hurt Sean Strickland, maybe because Sean Strickland was being an a-hole at the gym. If you guys remember that, well, that's what Sean Strickland does. He goes after champions and spars them at what they do. And you got to think maybe that's what works. Because you look at in grappling, Ryan Gordon, all these guys that are top champions in that particular style of fighting, which is grappling, jiu-jitsu, and whatnot, right? What do they have in common? Well, what they have in common is that they wrestle or grapple or do jiu-jitsu every day. So because of that, they are highly proficient at it, to which there are no holes in their game in terms of what it is that they haven't seen in comparison to the other population that doesn't put enough of the hours that they do. Meaning that they see everything, so they see more than you. And if there's anything that they're missing, well, you don't know about it because they're the ones that are evolving their games to the next level of the next generation. And that's what I mentioned with Sean Strickland. He came into MMA learning MMA in total, being a 90s baby. And once again, what I mentioned with Israel Adesanya earlier, a late 80s baby where guys like us within that age group just learned martial arts from a single-handed point of view, meaning that we came from pure wrestling and we never really did anything like that. Of course, when I was a kid, I remember I did wrestling, but then I did taekwondo, and then I knew a few kids that boxed, so I went to their gyms and did that. So I was doing boxing, taekwondo, and wrestling and jiu-jitsu. Nobody really knew about it. It was a niche thing unless you were living in LA near the Gracies or the Machados or anything like that. And then that was that. But that was a generation that you came from, was a single martial arts, and then you just try to blend everything. And then here comes Sean Strickland. Well, you could say that he's that. Not really, but he is a striker-based MMA fighter, meaning that he can slam you, he can wrestle. He didn't show it tonight, but he wanted to prove a point, or I just felt that he was comfortable fighting in that type of circumference of being able to use the Philly shell, use the jabs, just move forward. And then also on top of that, check the leg kicks that he was able to do against Izzy, which is very, very important when you're fighting the likes of Izzy, because there's a certain rhythm that he likes to do, which is what? The type of rhythm that Israel likes to do is he likes to throw jabs, he likes to throw 1-2s, and then leg kicks. Now, he does all the other spinning stuff as well, but he always starts it out with the basic, right? Whereas there are some guys that will start out with the flashy stuff and then work their way to the basics of the entire 5-round fight. And then there are some guys that will just try to go balls to the wall, like Alex Pereira, and just try to throw reckless, abandoned shots, cartwheels, 360 kicks, all these weird kung fu shots that they do in like the old school movies, like the Wu-Tang Clan films and whatnot, right? Like there's guys that will do that, but then there's guys that just keep it basic. Sean does none of that. He's not a flashy striker by any sense. But what Sean is a guy that knows how to fight with the basics, but also use his strength. And what kind of strength is that? Well, it's a forward matador mentality that you see with Sean Strickland when he was in LA, with the videos that you see where he challenges people and he'll just literally fight anybody as long as they don't have guns. So it's a very macho, aggro, forward thinking mentality, which in this case really worked. Because for one reason or another, you got to look at the side of Izzy tonight. You got to think maybe he was just a little bit hesitant. And by the way, shout outs to his teammate. I got to get with the other fights with Carlos Ulberg. The guy was able to get a submission. We thought it was the end of the round, but in reality, he was able to get the submission just 10 seconds just before the round had ended. And that was with Carlos Ulberg early in the night when that happened. Let's see here. You have Chepe Marcel getting that crazy knockout against Jack Jenkins early in the night. You had a 60% striking percentage for Chepe, And then with Jack Jenkins, you had a 61%, but he was just able to finish him right then and there at the end of the night. Carlos Ulberg, once again, with the third round submission, just 11 seconds just before the round ended. They had thought that this fight was going to be in a decision, right? But then out of nowhere, Carlos Ulberg was able to get the submission, and they didn't really see it until the replay. So shout outs to Carlos Ulberg for, and by the way, shout outs to Eugene Berman. How about being the fact that you had 6 guys that were fighting tonight in the card, and then on top of that, you had all these other guys that were fighting in a Muay Thai card the night before, all in Sydney, right? It's such a high roller coaster, but then you got to imagine the stoicism that is required out of Eugene Berman in order for him to have this type of this cold yet very business-like mentality that you need as a coach with this number of people that you're coaching within this particular weekend. Jamie Malarkey gets a decision win over John McDessie. John McDessie is a longtime veteran in the UFC, 49% strikes with Jamie Malarkey, no takedowns with any of these guys, just keeping it on the feet, but Jamie Malarkey just getting the best of them in there. And then in the earlier part of the night, you had Charles Raddick getting a decision over Mike Matea. Shane Young getting a submission loss against Gabriel Miranda, a little bit of an upset for the City Kickboxing tonight. And then Kevin Jousset getting a first-round submission against Kiefer Crosby, the long-time training partner of Conor McGregor. And how about Conor McGregor getting his black belt earlier this week? And you got to think, right, like a lot of these guys in Ireland, maybe they just don't have the type of grappling level that the rest of the world is just really up on, even though John Kavanagh, as you guys know, is the first black belt ever in the entire country of Ireland. And that's the lineage that Kiefer Crosby comes from. So moving on to the entire main card of the fight, you had Manel Kape. How about his call out at the end of the contest, right? After which he goes and calls the entire team of Izzy and Kai Kara France the F word. And I let you imagine exactly what that is, because you can't say that on this particular platform and you will get demonetized and canceled. But nonetheless, you know what he said. I think the one takedown that he was able to get in the in the third round, was very detrimental to helping him win this fight. And then, of course, you had Felipe Santos. He had all these jumping body kicks that Charles Oliveira likes to do. By the way, he trains in that same team as him. This is his UFC debut. Had 5 takedown stuff. Wasn't as successful at any of them. The striking was just on the side of Manel Kape, 62% versus 32%. And that was the night right there. But the highlight of all was the call out that Manel Kape did. And then how about Tai Tuivasa getting submitted by what we call an Ezekiel choke? 6'7", almost 300 pounds of Alexander Volkov. And of course, he cuts down to 265 like most of the heavyweights do. But nonetheless, one of the things that I thought was really important to highlight here was the importance of how Alexander Volkov was able to use his height within the grappling sense and his weight and height at the same time. Now, why is that important? Because a lot of people always emphasize that in the striking aspect, you are able to use your height, right? Nobody really understands the aspect of how to use their height in a grappling manner. And I thought that Volkov was able to display it that night. And what do I mean by that? First of all, you got to understand, when somebody is ground and pounding you, right? If they can posture up their 6'7" frame, they're able to land even more devastating shots just by the height alone. And it's kind of like the laws of gravity, right? If you're getting thrown off of a roof in any capacity, right? Especially if it's just at least a tall 2-story type of situation, it's going to hurt, right? That gravity alone is going to hurt you. So if he's punching you from a mounted position, postured up on the bottom, that's where height actually does matter in the grappling sense. Now, why do a lot of people say that height doesn't really matter in the grappling sense? Well, for one, they're talking about jiu-jitsu, and two, they're not talking about wrestling, and a lot of these people have never wrestled before, so maybe they don't understand the value and the aspect of being taller in clinch positions when, let's say, you are the taller man and you're leaning on them and pushing all your weight towards them in those grappling exchanges. That's when height does matter in grappling, because obviously a lot of people like to say that everyone's height is the same when they're on the ground. Well, yeah, that's if you're one of these guys that trains jiu-jitsu starting on their knees. That's the reality of it. So big ups to Alexander Volkov for being able to land the shots from up top, but not only that, grab the Ezekiel choke and using all his weight into it. And by the way, for those guys that have ever grappled in a jiu-jitsu studio or in an MMA setting or anything like that, you notice that the bigger guys that are in your gym are always going to use that particular choke if, let's say, they are in a mounted position. Because let's face it, if you're just doing grappling within the gym, you can't hit them, right? You can't punch them in a ground and pound type of matter. So because of that, because you can't ground and pound them, what's the next best thing you're going to do? You're going to try for an Ezekiel choke. You're going to try for an arm bar, and it's going to present itself in that particular territory, right? But in this particular case, why did Volkov not continue punching him when he could use all his posturing frame in order to do that? Well, for one, the reason why was because he didn't want to get tired, and the situation presented itself where he was able to slap in that choke and get that choke right on the top, which, by the way, if you can't defend it, just like Tai Tuivasa doesn't seem like a very long-time grappler in that particular aspect, not being able to defend it or move his hips out of that particular situation. Well, yeah, the opportunity is going to present itself, and that's what Volkov did, and he was able to get the submission win in that. And that was the co-main event. The other fights in the main card, you had Tyson Pedro getting a knockout against Anton Torgolov. I just felt that the way that Tyson was exchanging in that particular fight, I just felt that he had the stronger straight shots, right? A lot of people, they love to throw the hooks. They love to throw the uppercuts. They love to throw the overhand haymakers, all these fancy explosive shots, which will lead to knocking a lot of guys out. But there are just some guys out there that they have a certain bricks in their hands in which that even if they throw a jab at you, it will hurt. And Tyson Pedro is one of those guys, and he was able to display this tonight, and that's the reason why he was able to get the knockout. 55% out of the 36% strikes from Anton, and Tyson Pedro just showed that he was the stronger boxer in this particular setting, and Anton just had no answer for it. He didn't try to exchange with any particular kicks that was successful in his end. He didn't try to implement anything new in terms of trying to shoot for takedowns or go for clinches or anything like that. So that was the night for Tyson Pedro, and then Justin Tafa gets a devastating knockout from Austin Lane with a check right hook, and night he goes, and Justin Tafa gets a win in Sydney. And that right there is literally the entire fight card of the entire night, with Sean Strickland as the new 185-pound champion of the world, which is really crazy to say. And once again, going back into what we were saying earlier in the show, you have the aspect of 293 and 193. How did the world respond to Ronda Rousey back in UFC 193, just like what is going to happen in the world media stage with Sean Strickland as the champion post UFC 293? Okay, you guys don't remember, but Trump was not the president yet. He was going to be president because it was 2015 going into 2016. And he even tweets out that he was glad that Ronda Rousey lost. She's not a very nice person. And then Conor McGregor goes and defends her and pretty much goes after Trump. And nowadays he goes and praises Trump because for one reason or another, but that's neither here or there. So on top of that, a lot of people were really angry that Ronda Rousey committed to a media blackout, meaning she didn't want to talk to anybody. Just like tonight, what had happened with Izzy in the post-fight press conference, he said, well, I'm going to let my coach talk to you guys rather than me, which, by the way, is very unusual in the sport of mixed martial arts. Now, is that prominent to see in the world of boxing? 100%. They absolutely do that in boxing. They let the trainers talk, they let the managers talk, they let the promoters talk, and then they let the massage people talk, they let the nutritionists talk. And then even in one particular press conference with these two Mexican boxers, one time they had a priest talk in the pre-fight press conference, which is insane. And it's a little more controlled than that in the mixed martial arts world. But tonight, Izzy actually hands the mic to Eugene Berman as sort of like a media blackout of his own in a very similar fashion as Ronda Rousey did. And what is the overall theme that you could count with these two particular events that also took place in Australia? UFC 293 Sydney, UFC 193 Melbourne. What can you take out of that? You had two arrogant world champions finally getting somewhat of taste of their own medicine. But in this case, Izzy really took a taste of his own medicine because he is the more proficient striker, at least the more decorated striker, having glory and all these kickboxing accolades under him. Whereas with Sean Strickland, as I had mentioned, he grew up doing exactly just one thing, which is mixed martial arts. And he carried that over. And here's another thing that is very important to understand for what is important in fighting, right? Because every time somebody is champion, it is a copycat league. Oh, this guy does it this way, we're going to do it that way. This guy does ice baths before he does his workouts, we're going to do it like him. This guy does ice baths after workouts, we're going to do it like him. This guy does intermediate fasting, we're going to do it like him. This guy does calf kicks, we're going to do it like him. This guy does body kicks, it works, we're going to do it like him. Instead of using a single leg from the middle of the cage, we're going to use a single leg in the fence side of the cage and get better leverage like what Khabib does. Now everybody starts doing it. It's a copycat league, of course, because you're going to do what works. And what works now in this particular setting with the 185 division scene? Well, what works, obviously, being that Sean Strickland is now world champion, is obviously you go and you spar every day. And somehow that creates some sort of level of different skill and increasing your attributes as you're training along your camp. You know what's crazy about that? Right? One of the things I remember about Team Alpha Male Gym before Dwayne Ludwig had ever trained out there, one of the things that these guys like to do is they just like to go out and spar with each other. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed about going to that gym was just you go there, you slap hands with somebody, and next thing you know, you're either sparring, rolling, or doing a little bit of everything in between. And that right there, for one reason or another, I think really helped build your skill. There was a point where I did a lot of sparring, where I would do 4 to 5 times of sparring in a single week. And then I thought to myself, wow, I'm really starting to see a certain level of matrix in the striking, meaning that you see different openings that another guy doesn't do as much as you do, may not be able to see. And I think that's one of the things that is very detrimental in trying to understand rhythm. Also trying to understand normality of the violence that you experience. And what do I mean by that? Well, here's the thing, right? Robert Whittaker, surprisingly enough, he used to say to Izzy, hey, you're doing too much fighting. You're going to burn out your your nervous system or something like that. Like when Robert Whitaker said that, right? He was mentioning something to the effect where, you know what? Well, I don't stay as active as Izzy, so maybe it's better for my central nervous system that I'm not going out there and being this active. Okay, well, there's some positives in that, right? For one, you can absolutely maintain your brain health. And another thing that you can maintain out of that is you can also maintain a certain level of rest that you may need from the previous hard training sessions that you've endured all throughout these previous months. So that is the other aspect of that. But the other aspect and the other positivity of looking at what Izzy did tonight, or even what Sean Strickland also did, is the constant grind that they do, the constant understanding of range, the constant understanding of movement, and the constant understanding of being awareness in the red alert state. And what do I mean by the red alert state? Meaning that when you are under fire, when you are under a combat stress situation. And then Gino Alpha mentions back-to-back pay-per-view events of a white American guys named Sean outstriking black guys, winning the title as an underdog. Yeah, you know what? I got to tell you, Sean Strickland is one of those guys that's like a hero to the blue collar, regular type of dude, and he absolutely plays up to that. And you know what? What's even crazy about that is I don't think that he's pretending by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, look, one of the things that you can really find interesting about Izzy also, I don't think that he's pretending. I mean, sure, you can argue and say that Izzy is part of the agenda of trying to soften males or trying to somehow make them more feminine or something to that extent. Okay, one can argue that. But the problem is that Izzy is one of those guys that you really have to respect based on the activity that he was able to pull off, right? He's not afraid to fight anybody, right? But then again, neither is Sean Strickland, but I think the reason why he was able to win tonight was because it's just a whole different level of craziness that he was able to imply, but not only imply, also use it to literally scare the pants out of Israel Adesanya to engage. And I've mentioned this in the preview shows of the content that I did leading up to this fight, is that having the type of mentality where you live in LA, where Sean Strickland grew up. And by the way, I've already told you plenty of times some of the experiences that I've had with LA and the type of people that are out there, right? You got to think that it is a very violent environment in which you got to be on constant high alert. Okay. And the thing is that when you are having this constant alertness, I think that it helps you to deal with the stress of combat that you're going to deal with, such as a cage fight or maybe even a firefight, depending on whatever dangerous situation you're in. And what did he say here? Sean beat arguably the greatest kickboxer in UFC history with a jab and a 1-2. So I want to point this particular comment out right here, right? And I think this is really important to point out, is that Sean beat arguably the best kickboxer in UFC history with a jab and a 1-2. Yes, because sometimes that's literally all that you need. And one of the reasons why he was able to do that was based on the fact that Israel Adesanya, for one reason or another tonight, felt a little bit insecure to engage. And sometimes that is really all that you need in order for you to be able to implement your game. If you're able to implement your game and you're able to somehow outmaneuver your opponent in ways that is making him rethink about what his next movement is going to be, and then you're just doing the movement that you want to do, guess what? You are winning that negotiation. And that's literally what Sean Strickland displayed tonight, was that he was the better negotiator in terms of getting the center of the octagon. And then on top of that, they both did a really good job on being able to keep the fight at a striking range. That's something a lot of people really don't give a lot of credit to a lot of fighters when they're able to do that. They just think, okay, we're watching a kickboxing match. What a lot of people don't know is that a lot of those exchanges are able to be done based on the fact that one guy is keeping their hand down. And what do I mean by that? Well, if one guy is able to keep their hands down, because here's something, right? It baffles me how much a lot of people really don't understand fighting. I'll give you an example. I was at a gym, right? I was shadow boxing at a sauna, and I thought this is really like important to share because one guy made a smart remark. He said something to me. He's like, "Yeah, I think you got to try to keep your hands up more, or this and that." And I'm like, what an absolute idiot this guy is, right? And I don't mean to demean him in any kind of way, but he just didn't understand what he was talking about. Because, for one, you got to think if you're shadow boxing, first of all, when I shadow box, I'm not shadow boxing for boxing or for kickboxing. I'm literally shadow boxing for, well, essentially mixed martial arts, which is the ultimate form of complete combat. Okay, so I'm literally shadow boxing for mixed martial arts. So part of the reason why you would probably have to keep your hands down, okay, dimwit, is because of the fact that you have to take into consideration the takedown shots, being able to wrist control somebody, being able to stuff takedowns, being able to put yourself in those positions in order to do that. But then at the same time, you also have to be explosive enough. And by the way, you also have to do countless hours of training in order to have those explosivities, okay? In order to be able to put your hands up straight away, put your hands up down, get them up right away, change levels, switch up levels, higher up your levels, get in a Muay Thai stance, boom, now get in a wrestling stance, boom, now get in a boxing stance. This is something that the average mind doesn't understand. They don't understand this. Most people's minds are too slow to understand or comprehend this. So because of that, it's easy for them to say, oh, you should keep your hands up, man. I know the basics. Okay. But the problem is sometimes the basics do work. And tonight, that proved it. It proved it. But also, you also got to take into consideration, like I said, give credit to the fact that they were able to keep this fight on the feet, because that is one of the most underrated skills that a kickboxer or a striking centric fighter in the likes of Sean Strickland could do tonight. Meaning being able to keep your hands down when you need to, being able to put yourself in a Philly shell position in order to slip shots, in order to slip kicks. By the way, Sean Strickland also showed tonight that being able to use the Philly shell, which, by the way, is famously used by Floyd Mayweather and the likes of many other great boxers such as James Toney, it is also very effective in mixed martial arts in terms of avoiding the kicks. And even in Muay Thai, if some of these guys can get out of their shells and go out and try something new in terms of evolving their style into something modern, which a lot of them do. And then the ones that do are the ones that are highly successful at it. And there are the names that you know, such as Rodtang, such as Bukau, all these big names in Muay Thai. And then the rest of them just look like everybody else in the copycat league. But here's the interesting thing that you got to understand of why there is no right or wrong in martial arts. Because tonight, what Sean Strickland displayed was that basics work. And Holly Holmes, by the way, when she knocked out Ronda Rousey in UFC 193, because I'm relating this to UFC 293, if you're wondering why I'm going back and forth with these two different events that happened in two different eras, I think that there are some similar parallels that you can take a look at. Okay, so I thought that was really important to share in that. By the way, what happened at UFC 193, right? Because I've already mentioned some of the media implications, the fact that Donald Trump even made a comment about it. Let's take a look at all the other fights that had happened, which I think is really important to take a look at the history of martial arts in and of itself, right? So you had Ben Nguyen. I think he's probably still in the UFC right now. He had a first round submission against Ryan Benoit. James Montessori, by the way, was a former Korean American Taekwondo fighter, fought in the Olympics and got into the UFC. And here he is. He was able to share this card with these stars right here. And then Richard Walsh gets a decision against Stephen Kennedy. Daniel Kelly, the former Australian judoka participant, gets a decision win in that. And by the way, he's become a staple of Australian UFC mixed martial arts events all throughout the years right after this. Jake Matthews was in this card, gets a second round TKO against Akbar Arolia. Kyle Noak, who, by the way, was in the stance tonight, sitting behind Kai Kara France, and Kai Kara France was sitting right in front of Israel Adesanya's brother while he was getting called out by Manel Kape. And Manel Kape, obviously, tonight went and called his team the F word, and you guys already know what I mean by that. John Vellante had better days in those times. 2015 gets a first-round knockout against Anthony Peroche. Danny Martinez gets a decision win, and then on to the main cards. Obviously, you had Ronda getting knocked out. You had Joanna Jędrzejczyk taking on Valerie Letourneau. And how about Mark Hunt? Right? One of the proponent leaders of the current lawsuit that is going on with the UFC right now. He had a win over Antonio Silva, and Antonio Silva ever since has become a punching bag because every week he's in different events. He's in different fight leagues. He's in different sports, just constantly getting knocked out. One week he does a boxing event. He gets knocked out. The next week he does a glory fight. In the kickboxing rules, he gets knocked out. Another bare knuckle fight, he gets knocked out. An MMA card, he gets knocked out. And that night in UFC 193, November 14, 2015, gets knocked out by Mark Hunt. Uriah Hall gets a decision loss against none other than Robert Whittaker. We know where Robert Whittaker is right now. Jared Rashalt actually gets a decision win over Steven Struve. 6'11" Steven Struve, and we know where he is right now. And of course, everybody during that night just could not get enough of the fact that Ronda Rousey had lost and felt that she had deserved it. Now, tonight, it almost seems like that's how a lot of people feel about Israel Adesanya. Because here's something you got to understand about MMA, right? Nobody cares about your moral high ground unless you win or lose. Now, when I mean nobody cares, I literally mean the wide, massive audience of the people that would consume mixed martial arts in its capacity to buy the pay-per-view, in terms of being able to, let's say, consume merchandise in any way that you could contribute to the cause of this entire community, right? Well, one of the things you got to understand is that when you get enough people to hate you, right, people are going to relish in your downfall. And I think Izzy and Ronda Rousey handled it differently. But I think what's important to understand is that how Izzy handled it is he's going to face the media head on, but face it in a way where whatever they're going to say to him, he's almost going to do an Eminem-like reversal role where he's like, well, yeah, I lost the fight. Well, yeah, I'm trailer trash. Oh, well, yeah, I'm this and that. And now you can't say anything to him, right? Whereas with Ronda Rousey, she just did a complete media blackout and wanted to avoid the whole thing because people just enjoyed relishing in it. And then the more that she wanted to get away from people and cause a media blackout, the more that people were just going to create memes about it. And if she wasn't going to answer for it, then other people were going to answer for her. And guess what? Israel Adesanya is doing the complete opposite. He's going to face them head on. But even to the point where I think it's going to lead to a rematch. And by the way, how about this? UFC 300 is not too far away. We're talking about UFC 293 right now. And then we're now talking about UFC 300 in just maybe a couple of months, less than a year, maybe 6 months or so if you have a pay-per-view every month from now till then on. Right? And then in that, you can throw in a whole bunch of other names for a world championship fight. Maybe other famous names or some weird celebrity matchups that you could insert into that. But speaking of which, how about UFC 200? Let's take a look at some classic cards right here, right? What was in UFC 200? Obviously, you had Daniel Cormier taking on Anderson Silva, based on the fact that Anderson Silva came in at a last minute's notice because John Jones got caught with some steroids. And that was one of the famous scenes where Daniel Cormier was crying in the hallways with Dana White while he was sitting down in a chair and he just couldn't believe it. And then here comes Anderson Silva to save the day. And then Anderson Silva gets beat up for 3 rounds out of the frustration of DC from John Jones not being able to make the fight. So obviously, Miesha Tate had lost that night against Amanda Nunes, which started Amanda Nunes as the icon champion that she is. And now you've seen that she's retired back in UFC 289 in Vancouver. And Brock Lesnar gets a draw overturned against Mark Hunt, maybe because they found steroids in his system. But nonetheless, it was originally that Brock Lesnar had won that fight. And that was the co-main event. Underneath it was Anderson Silva and Daniel Cormier. Then Jose Aldo had a win against Frankie Edgar coming off of that Conor McGregor loss. Cain Velasquez beats up Travis Brown, who, by the way, is now married to Ronda Rousey. Somehow relates to all of this because I'm talking about UFC 200 and the fact that UFC 300 can take place with Sean Strickland and Israel Adesanya, with Israel Adesanya as the challenger this time. TJ Dillashaw gets a win against Sun Zhao. Johnny Hendricks gets a loss against Kelvin Gastelum by decision. Julia Pena beats Kat Zingano. You see where she's at now. Sage Northcutt gets a decision against the unknown Enrique Marin, and now you see where Sage Northcutt is now. In the earlier cards, because this was a big card, right? So they had Jim Miller starting out in the first fight, and they're talking about putting Jim Miller in the 300 card. Gegard Mousasi went on to become a Bellator champion, didn't get a lot of respect from the UFC, but when he went on to that other organization, he was able to kick butt and take names and make a legend out of himself. That was against Thiago Santos, who, by the way, is a former title challenger against John Jones, and then Diego Sanchez against Joe Lozon. And that right there was the classic fights of UFC 200. So, by the way, what a great night of fights with UFC 293 in Sydney, Australia. I'm glad that I was here to cover it. I'm glad that I was able to watch it. I'm glad that I'm able to just be able to react to this and you guys listen to it. And nonetheless, we're always going to enjoy the fights. And this is one of the most shocking turn of events that we have ever experienced. So like and subscribe, join the community, and let's experience more great nights like this. Inshallah.